This week on the show, we are a few weeks away from Christmas. We've actually officially entered the holiday season. And I know that with the holiday season, there's a lot of anxiety involved, not just because the season is so busy, but for a lot of us Filipinos, there's also anxiety around getting together with family during the holidays and just also loneliness. I know a lot of immigrants who are not with their family also experience homesickness. So we're going to be talking about that this afternoon on our program. And I'm so pleased and very excited to have this very important conversation with you this afternoon. Dr. Stacey Litam, hello and welcome to the show.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dr. Stacey Litam. I am a professor of counselor education at Cleveland State University and recent author of the new book, Patterns That Remain, A Guide to Healing for Asian Children of Immigrants.
I love that. And Dr. Peter Morante is also joining us. Go ahead, Peter, and introduce yourself.
Hello, kababayan. My name is Peter Morante. I'm a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, board certified, and also a nurse educator. And I'm glad to be here and to help out our kababayans.
Yes, I thought of having this discussion because it's very timely and it's needed in our community. There was a time when mental health is an issue that we didn't talk about in public. Has it changed?
I do think that we're seeing less stigma around mental health discussions and predominantly around younger generations. I think that the younger generations have really grown up around screens. And what's interesting, those screens can be helpful and harmful. We're seeing this overall more openness and really this privilege around being able to have these conversations that maybe a generation ago we still felt a lot of shame and stigma around. Filipino Americans continue to be the least likely compared to other Asian ethnic groups to get professional counseling services. So we're seeing an increase there, and I think it's primarily driven by younger generations, and that is also linking to older generations. So it's also crossing the generational gap.
I also wonder if being Filipino American, Stacey is coming from that lens, born in the Philippines, but moved here when she was 2, essentially being raised as American, whereas Peter moved to the US in his teen years, right?
So I was an immigrant coming from Philippines. I moved here when I was 18 years old. So there was so much stigma back home. The access and also the knowledge about mental health was never discussed back home. And when I moved here in United States, I see a big openness about it, and I was informed about the accessibility, and also people tends to talk about it more than back home in the Philippines. And also the accessibility and the care that we're rendering right now is more up to date and more evidence-based.
More evidence-based, yes, because there's more people that are willing to come out and participate in studies like this as well. So as we approach the holiday season, I know it's a source of anxiety because it is the season for jolly and for merry, for gift giving, for giving and everything. But at the same time, it's also such a busy season and hectic. What are your top 5 that you see among the patients that you see that are triggers that we need to be aware of during the season?
So when I think about the top 5 mental health triggers among Phil-Ams, the first one that comes to mind is typically these value conflicts. So we tend to see this disconnect or this incongruence between things like political differences or even conflicting ideas about what is considered appropriate, right, or healthy when it comes to who we love and how we feel. So that person then feels uncomfortable or even unsafe or unwelcome to return to their own home.
As an immigrant, I think we put a lot of emphasis on family expectations and pressure also.
Similar, right? Yeah, okay.
Just to piggyback that, we put a lot of emphasis on family gatherings. There's a lot of pressure to meet family expectations and also financial contributions, hosting gatherings, or performing ideal roles in the family. So this pressure can definitely bring us inadequacy, frustration, or even resentment. A coping strategy, what we can tell our patients is that to set healthy boundaries with the family and open communication, what you can contribute or what not, and how you can not overextend yourself, because that happens sometimes when we push our limits. And remember, it's okay to say no if something's too overwhelming.
Right, it's very similar, your number 1 triggers, guys, they didn't talk. I did see their answers. But Stacey, What about you? For you, how do people cope? How can people cope?
So similarly to what Dr. Peter said, I think that setting realistic, flexible boundaries is so important. Learning how to choose your battles and also learning that it's okay if folks have different ideas and different belief systems. We might not agree, and that's okay. Recognizing that change happens slowly across time, and sometimes it might take a little bit longer for your titos and titas to understand from where you're coming from, and that's okay too. It's all part of the process. So part of it is also learning to practice and cultivate compassion for self and compassion for others.
We are just starting our conversation on mental health during the holidays, which is much needed in our community. Talking about the triggers that we may expect, some people anticipate, some people know they will go through during the holidays, and how to cope. We will be back with more. Don't go away. Thank you for sharing your time with us here on So Janelle. You are watching the program that brings you stories of immigration and representation. Nandito din po kami para alalayan kayo, giving you information and tips on how to not just survive but also thrive here in the US. We are available on the Filipino channel, TFC, if you're watching on Sundays, on ANC, if you're watching on Saturdays, and on Mondays, KXLA Channel 44. We are also available on demand on I Want TFC, and we are always on our social media platforms on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. This afternoon on the show, I am so thankful that they made time for us. Dr. Stacey Litam joining us from the East Coast, as well as Dr. Peter Morante joining us here from here in Southern California, also giving us tips. I know that we started earlier with the triggers during the holidays. What is your number 2 trigger that we have to look out for?
My second trigger that I see with a lot of my patients, especially the Filipino Americans, is the financial pressure to support family back home, which can lead to a lot of significant financial strain for them too. And this pressure of sending remittances, buying expensive gifts, and contributing to family needs can create a lot of stress for them, particularly for those with limited financial resources. So I always tell my patients they gotta set a clear and realistic budget for sending financial support during the holidays and be honest about their financial limits. And remember, your value isn't defined by material gifts or contributions that you guys give to your family back home.
Definitely. I'm also seeing memes already about how I've already checked my budget, and the only thing I can afford to give you this Christmas is prayers or something, and it's okay, right?
So this one is tricky, and this is one that I suspect a lot of listeners are going to be able to connect with and resonate. So take a deep breath. It is when we get those unsolicited comments from our titas about bodies and weight and food. So we get these messages on one hand where they say, eat more, you're too skinny, you're too skinny. And then in the next breath, or even in the next sentence, they'll say, ay nako, you're getting so fat. So we get these conflicting messages around food and weight, and that can be really psychologically activating for folks. So there are a lot of different ways you can respond. And so your relationship to that person is going to be important. Also, if you are sort of in line at the food line with them and it's just one-on-one, you might respond in a different way than if you're in a group setting or all at the dinner table together. So be really strategic and mindful about how you're responding and making sure that you are taking care of yourself and remembering that it's okay not to pick every battle. You can pick and choose to what you respond to.
My number 3 trigger that I see with a lot of my patients that I'm serving is the loss of loved one. And holidays can be especially painful for those who have lost their loved ones. So I tell my patients, allow yourself to grieve. Just be patient with yourself. Feel the pain. Take time to honor your loved ones. Write them a letter. Include them with your holiday rituals in meaningful ways, or sharing stories with others who remembers them. And seek support from your friends, your counselors, or support groups, or mental health professionals like us.
My number 3 trigger is noticing intergenerational trauma patterns across the generational gap. And so with that can often come feelings of resentment and frustration, and then also hopefulness for parents and older adults who might see the world differently, because we might feel feelings of resentment because things are so different or things are not as we wish they could be.
Right.
So,
can you give an example for that?
Yeah, so one of the ones that I tend to notice across children of immigrants and specifically Asian children of immigrants is what we call the conspiracy of silence. So when we have family histories, whether it's a specific trauma, maybe it is surviving COVID-19 and having a lost loved one, or whether that is related to even the Japanese occupation in World War II, what we find is that parents rarely talk about those trauma experiences with children, and children who already have this superpower and their ability to make meaning out of everything, children internalize that silence as shame. So children incorporate these shame stories around what it must mean to be Filipino, or what it must mean to be part of this family as a Filipino American. In reality, the conspiracy of silence really occurs because parents want to protect their children from the trauma story, but the children interpret the silence as something is wrong here, and that's why they're not talking about it. So this is why it's so important to break these intergenerational trauma patterns.
And how do you break that?
Having these kinds of conversations, watching Sojanelle TV and listening to the importance of contextualizing the Filipino American experience and recognizing that Filipino history is American history.
This is very important and very timely right now. Social comparison and holiday perfectionism. Social media can amplify feelings of inadequacy during the holidays, as we see people posting about their perfect celebrations, new gifts, trouble experiences. So this can make some people feel like their own holiday experience isn't good enough. My coping strategy for this one, and I tell my patients that they should limit time spent on social media if it starts to cause a lot of distress for them. Focus on your own version of your holiday joy and practice gratitude for the things that you have. Remember, what you see online is often curated and doesn't reflect reality for most people.
I always say this, don't compare your insides to people's outsides, because what you see on social media are only what they want us to see.
So mine actually is very similar to Dr. Peters. So I'm really glad that you shared that when you did. It really is around compare despair. It really is around these messages of invalidation about our career choices, our partner choices, our choices about whether we want to have children or when we want to have children, and how our choices and other choices that maybe our family are hoping that we make, when those are incongruent, that can elicit a lot of feelings of frustration, disappointment, and resentment.
So I love that. Compare despair. Okay, so don't compare, embrace imperfection, find joy in the things that you have, gratitude, right? Always shine. So practice those things. Number 5 trigger. We'll start with us, Dr. Stacey, this time.
So my number 5 trigger are the feelings of frustrations that tend to arise when we see this ongoing silence about important mental health conversations and substance use issues. We still see high rates of mental health and substance use stress in Filipino American families, and we're rarely talking about it. So that can be really frustrating when folks begin to notice this pattern, and then also notice, ooh, we are not discussing or even centering or acknowledging whether this impacts our family, our relationship, and our sense of connecting to one another.
There's also a lot of parties that go on, holiday get-togethers, and drinking can be a source of problem for some as well, right? And how do you cope with that? What is your coping mechanism, your advice for viewers?
So really that's around self-awareness and noticing. It's about a pattern of noticing how you feel during, after, and even before you start engaging in substance use. So thinking, okay, am I feeling stressed? Am I feeling angry? Am I feeling frustrated? Am I feeling anxious? And what is the drive to drink? Is it social connection, or is it internal conflict and anxiety? So sometimes having a deeper understanding of what that internal drive is can give us a bit more understanding of what we're hoping to experience. So whenever I have a client in session who says, I'm worried about my substance use, I'm worried about, the way that I interact with other folks, I always ask them, what do you hope to experience? If they say connection, great. How else can we facilitate that might not include as much alcohol? If they say, I want to feel less anxiety, great. How might we cultivate connection to increase that without also including substances if that's not something you're choosing? So be curious about what are you hoping to experience and how else might we get you there in a more adaptive way.
Right. I like the self-awareness, but also the time to pause, being deliberate about taking the time for yourself, right, during this time, which is also very difficult because if you say bam, 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 it's so like always go like shopping and wrapping presents and holiday parties and all that. It's okay going back to the number one coping mechanism we said earlier is it's okay to say no, it's okay to pass, it's okay to miss out on some things, right? Because
Yes.
what's important is you're taking the time for yourself. Dr. Peter, your number 5 trigger and how to cope.
And I think everyone can relate with this that many Filipino Americans experience homesickness, especially during the holiday season. We celebrate Christmas starting September and
In the Philippines, yes.
Philippines back home, and we feel disconnected from family in the Philippines. So this can bring some loneliness and isolation. So my coping strategy will be I tell my patients stay connected through your virtual celebrations, right? And if possible, you can plan a visit back home or invite extended family to come over here in the US to bridge that distance. And we can create a meaningful traditions that blend both our Filipino and American values that ease the feelings of disconnection. So there's a lot of like Filipino events that you can go into and a lot of gatherings that you can be involved with.
If they forget everything that we've talked about in the last how many minutes or so, all the triggers, all the coping mechanisms, if there's one that they should always remember, what would it be?
One of my favorite coping responses is to acknowledge the intent, but also the outcome. So when folks are saying things that are harmful, like, when are you gonna have kids? Or, oh my gosh, you've gotten so much heavier. You can say, I know you're not intending to hurt my feelings, but that comment's really hurtful.
I would like to impart the 5 M's that I practice with my patients. The first one is meditation. Number 2 is mindfulness. So stay in the present moment. Number 3, meaningful engagement. Choose people that choose you. One thing, movement. I tell my patients try to get up, do some exercise. It can be walking. The last one will be med compliance. If you need to be on medication that you need to be assessed, and if appropriate, then that's wherein we as licensed mental health professionals are here to support you. And it's okay to be not okay.